Okay, so let's go back on over here. And then first, let's just do a quick recap of our building blocks. So I'm thinking about this as a system now, right? So what is the system built off of? We're going to build off of something, and we have 12 notes. So we've made the 12 notes. That's it. So I want to think of it as cleanly as possible as simply 12 notes. Remembering that when I go to when I get the bureaucratic system in there, then you're going to have these sharps and flats, and they're going to start using names that don't make any sense. Like, well, there's a natural half step, and there's natural notes and unnatural notes and this and that, which is all, from a theory standpoint, nonsense, complete nonsense, right? But we have to deal with it. So I want to see the clean way of seeing it, the way the computer does it, right? The way the computer says, hey, look, if you want me to do it, then you have to give me stuff that's not bureaucratic jargon. Strip it down to the actual information and remove all the nonsense, right? That's what we want to do mentally so that we can work with it as well. And then we convert that. So I can repeat that. I can see that as a repeating thing or as a circular thing, remembering that we basically have 12 notes that repeat around in a circle, or we can think of it as an infinite timeline that's going to keep repeating but have an octave higher going down. When I write the letters down, I'm going to try to tie out the letters. I'm going to use a 1 for A. I used a 1 instead of a 0 for the programmers out there, because I think it's easier to remember, and I don't see anything that holds me up from what I'm trying to do as we map this out. And I'll map it all the way out to intervals and to chord naming conventions. But that means that we have then this in between, which again they call a weird note, an unnatural note. It's not an unnatural note. It's the same half step away of every other note when you look at it from just a normal measuring system. And I'm not going to call it an A sharp or a B flat because that's too difficult to remember. If I'm trying to remember it, I'll say that if I'm talking to someone in Washington, I'll say, okay, yeah, it's an A sharp and it's a B flat, whatever. But I'm going to think about it as an AB or a 2, okay? Because it's cleaner. All right. And then we're going to keep on going. So then you got the B and then you got the C. And now they say there's a natural half step. You can call it, if you're in Washington, they call it a natural half step. It's like, okay, it's a natural half step, but it's not really. It's just going from 3 to 4. It's the same distance. There's nothing naturally different between the distance between a 3 and a 4 and a 2 and a 3. But okay, I see what you're saying. I know how the bureaucracy works. And then we've got a CD, which is a C sharp or a D flat. Okay. And then we've got a D, and then we've got a D sharp or an E flat and an E, and then you got this natural half step, which isn't really a natural half step. It's just because it was based on the major scale. So that's cool, whatever. And then we've got and then we can repeat it. So I want to be able to code switch back and forth between these two, and I want to be able to number this one or say it in my mind as A sharp. If there's two A's next to each other, then what am I going to call it? A B flat. That's how the spelling works, right? So now that we have an alphabet that's overly complex, you have the spelling problem, which basically means that if there's two A's next to each other, I call the one A B flat, right? Or if I'm counting down, I should properly do it by saying B. Don't say ain't. Don't say ain't in Washington. They're going to look at you funny. You say it the right way. You don't say you all in Washington. They're going to treat you bad. So you say, okay, it's not a 2. It's not an AB. When I'm going backwards, we say it's a B flat. It's a B flat, okay? And when I go this way, it's an A sharp. Okay, I could say that. And then if I combine them together, I'm going to call it a 1A. That's what I'm going to put in my worksheets over here, which I have the low E string on top, which I think is the easiest way to see it, right? And so we put the low E string on top because I think visually I've made the argument that's easier to see if I'm trying to map everything out. And I can even see it by just looking at the numbers, which you could call the Nashville music system. Proud to call it that. That's great. But I'm also going to suggest that should be tied to the modes. The modes can be thought of as points, and they could be thought of as the scale. So the modes are the points. That's the key that we want to look. When I memorize the guitar, I want to memorize the shape, caged system, perfect. 5 breakout, 3 note per string, however you want to do it all those ways, but add to it the Nashville music system, numbering system, which you can also say letter-wise, is basically the modes. That's useful to be able to convert back and forth between the letter and the mode. Why? Because when you name the chords, I'd really like to know what the modal chord is that I'm playing. If I play the 1-4-5, the Nashville music system is insinuating that those are different. The 4 and the 5 are different than the 1. And how are they different? You have to say that it's the mode, right? It's a different modal chord. Now, notice that the current system ignores the idea of any other chord. I just want to point this out because this is where we're going. This is the problem we want to kind of address. When you think of playing something off of the Dorian, what do they call it? If I play the Nashville music system off of the 2, I make that like the tonic. Then I build a chord off it. What am I going to call that chord? Well, the current system forces me to say that's a minor chord, right? I don't want to call it a minor chord. It's on the 2. I want to build it off the 2. A minor chord would indicate I'm building it off the 6. You see, the naming convention's forcing me to call it not a Nashville music theory 2 chord, but it's forcing me to think of it as a 6. Not only that, but it's forcing me to think of it as though it's a 6, but it's the 1 of the minor scale, because then I have to take the 1-3-5, which most people think of as though they're building off of an Aeolian scale. You see, all of that is getting muddied. The chord system throws out all other modes, all other Nashville number positions other than the root and the 6, the major, the minor, the Aeolian, the Ionian and Aeolian, the 1 and the 6. All the other modes they throw out of the naming convention. That causes a problem when you're trying to use the Nashville numbering system and tell people chords, right? So what we want to do is follow the logic through to bridge the gap and see that clearly, how the language is kind of throwing us off, and then say, how can I deal with that and bridge the gap while I'm doing that so I can communicate with Washington and do this. So I got these combined together now. So now that they're combined together, then we apply. So remember, this is how you would structurally do it. You don't do it backwards like the way we learn the piano backwards, which isn't a problem just for guitar people. It's a problem for piano people, by the way, too, because we learn the 7 notes before the 12 notes. And that really messes us up, because I want to learn the 12 notes, and then, because that's really the baseline. That's the foundation. The foundation isn't the 7 notes. The foundation is the 12 notes. And then we apply the formula that we're just going to accept a priori, which is going to start on C instead of A. That's just the way they did it, because C became the scale that everybody loves. I love it too. So we got a whole step, half step, whole step, and then you could go to a whole step here, another octave up or around the circle here, right? Whole step, and then half step back to an octave up. So I can visualize it as an infinite, just like a number system going up infinitely, applying that formula over and over, or we can envision it as a circle that goes around infinitely, although the circle doesn't give you the idea of the octaves. In practice, of course, it's the spiral. It has a circular motion and linear motion. So we got C, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So that's going to be, the formula. Now we apply the modes to it. Now this is the Nashville numbering system, okay? Yeah, that's what we're going to do is give it a numbering system and make those permanent. So that ties in to the Nashville numbering system, although different people seem to explain that a little bit differently depending on who you talk to. So I'm going to try to make it as defined as I can. But all these points, I'm going to name it. I'm going to name it Ionian, Dorian. Then I'm going to give it a numbering system, which will be like the Nashville numbering system. So the D is Dorian. And it's not always a D, but the second position is Dorian, and then Phrygian, and then Lydian, Mixolydian, Aeolian, and then Locrian. So we're going to name them seven names. I know those names are ugly, and it's obviously that's why we're going to give it a numbering system to some degree, but it's useful to tie it into the naming convention in some way, because we're going to also want to be building the idea of intervals and chord constructions based on these as the root. Okay, so then I can say, okay, well, if I have that, then we have our notes. These are the notes, the 7 notes in our key, which is C major being a useful key to work with because of the sharps and flats. Now, again, this is a benefit of the problematic system. Like instead of saying all the notes are the same, 1 through 12, we picked special key of C, which resulted in these sharps and flats when you play anything other than the key of C and other diatonic modes of it. That gives us a check system, which is nice. So we might as well use that and work things out in the key of C, and then everything is transferable, everything is shiftable from there. So if I pull all these notes in, they're all what they call the natural notes, which again, there's not such thing really as natural, and there's no unnatural notes, but we call them natural notes. So then we could repeat this in the similar fashion. So now you have 2 layers. We've got the layer of notes 1 through 12, and then we built on top of that, we built from that foundation using our formula a 7-note layer, which we can call basically a scale. Now, of course, what would we want to do with that 7-note layer? We want to number them. So now when you number them, you could use Roman numerals. This is a convention which I think was invented by the Nashville guys, because I'm not totally sure on that, but you have a numbering system because the Roman numerals have capital and lowercase Roman numerals. So you can, when you're just learning to play, you can say, well, I'm going to be playing in a major key or any of these keys, and then I want to have the Roman numeral either uppercase or lowercase. That determines if it's going to be a major chord or a minor chord. So that means that this one's going to be the 1, but I'm going to make it a Roman numeral 1. The 2 happens to have a minor chord. We'll talk about chord creation later. So it has a Roman numeral lowercase 2. And then this one has a 3, and it's a Roman numeral lowercase 3. And this one is a 4 because it's, the V is a 5, minus 1 is 4 because it's in front of it. And that's going to be a Roman numeral 4. So you build a major chord off that. And then this one is Roman numeral 5. And so you're going to build off of this G, in this case, a major chord. And then this is Roman numeral 6, which is lowercase. You build a major chord off of these two because these are uppercase. This is a lowercase for the 6. So it's 5 is the V plus 1 because it's on the other side instead of on this side. So you have 6. And then you've got the funny one, which is Roman numeral 7, but I put a dot next to it to indicate that that's the diminished, which sometimes you'll see with a little circle up top. I'm going to try to keep my symbology as clean as possible for entering it as quickly as possible into software. And so, like Excel, because I want to do everything in Excel to the extent that I can, because Excel is the best tool for learning music theory ever. Okay? That's part of one of my videos if you want to look at that one. People have problems with that sometimes. Apparently that's a problematic statement to make in some circles, but it's nonetheless the case. We deal with facts here. That's the truth. So we can then put it in, and then I can give it a abbreviation so I can at least make it a little bit smaller. I'm just going to call it an ion, a door, a free, a lid, a mix, an AO, and a locrian. Now, notice that within Western music, you've got these modes, but then basically at the time when Western music kind of really took off, they actually we were playing before that, like when you play like folk music, then it was, I think, more in Mixolydian. Mixolydian is a music that's fun to kind of just groove to, just jam to, and as are some of the other modes. But when you're trying to make a dramatic, like something dramatic, like a symphony or an opera, then it leaned towards the Ionian and the Aeolian. And notice that's why they came up with another name, and they basically called the Ionian the major and the Aeolian then the minor. So then that's why we get this idea that there's only major and minor, because they're thinking those are the things that at the time they wanted to build from, and everything else took a back seat. Now, So that means all of the chord naming conventions, all of the interval naming conventions are built as though the modes don't even exist. Like even the Ionian and Aeolian have been renamed to major and minor as though there aren't anything, like the modes have all been removed. And that's, so I think clearly these, if we were to look at it properly these days, you'd say, no, that's not the way I would want to build it right now. I'd want to say, no, all the modes are connected to each other. They're all the same notes. They all have equal value, at least theoretically. You can say that you prefer Aeolian or Ionian and Aeolian, but they're all going to have kind of equal value in theory. And so that's again part of the problem, because like I say, this is the way we want to see it, this Nashville music numbering system. That's how I want to name things. I want to take it beyond. I want to name the chord a 2 chord. But then what do I call the 2 chord? What do I call it? Well, it's got a little 2. That means it's a minor. That's a minor chord. Well, what is minor? Minor is the Aeolian mode, but it's not the Aeolian mode. It's the Dorian mode. Well, how do you build something off of the 2 chord? Well, you have to think of it as the one. The one of what? The one of a minor chord, because you're building a minor chord. But the minor is an Aeolian. Do you see? Do you see that messes up our whole, not just on the guitar, particularly on the guitar, but also on the piano, and the whole numbering system takes you out of the whole Nashville idea of a numbering system, which is actually the right way to think about it from a logistical, just playing perspective. And it takes you out of the idea of the cage system. The cage system and the Nashville numbering system are the more sophisticated systems. Those are the right systems. What we currently have is dealing with bureaucratic laws that have been built up over time that is not as clean. It's not as lean and mean. It's not as clean, right? You have to deal with that, right? You got to deal with the bureaucracy. So I can deal with it. It won't drive me crazy. It can give me a heart attack. I'm going to die a little early if I got to go to Washington too many times, but I can deal with it. I can deal with it when I need to. So then we have the mode norm. So I'm going to call it then a lowercase number when I start to think about how you might name intervals. Now, again, you might not follow me through the concept of wanting to name intervals. We'll talk more about that later and whatnot. But I think it'd be really good to think about why this would be the logical next step if you were building it from scratch this time, and it will lead into the bridge as to bridging the concepts in your mind so you can have a better conception of it. But in any ways, I would name it just from a letter, a little I, right, and a little d. That you can get that confused with a D note. But I don't think it's too bad, because I usually name the notes with a capital. So I can abbreviate this then with the Nashville number system, a Roman numeral 1, if you would like, or I'm going to call it a little I, or just Ion. So these are the 3 ways that you might represent it. I think the fastest way to put it into like a fretboard over here is with this symbol.